After the Great War, Britain did not return to political normalcy, but instead plunged into a period of profound confusion and shifting power dynamics. Welcome to CSS Breakdown, Book by Book, Season 06, Episode 23, where we dissect Chapter 23 of Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern British History, 4th edition. We're about to take a deep dive into a truly chaotic and transformative period of British politics from 1918 to 1924. This was a time when the traditional two-party system was, well, completely upended. New political forces emerged, and the nation grappled with immense challenges in the wake of the Great War.
And it was a crucial 6 years for Britain, definitely, marked by shifting alliances, economic turmoil, and just a dramatic reshaping of the political landscape. What's fascinating here is how much the problems of peacetime Britain proved as difficult as, if not, more so than the problems of war.
Right.
We'll explore the surprising solutions, why some political giants stumbled, and how these few years really laid the groundwork for decades to come.
So let's unpack this. The Great War is over, but politics certainly doesn't just snap back to normal. Lloyd George, still riding high as the wartime prime minister, leads a coalition government into the December 1918 election. Now imagine yourself a voter in this election. It was the first since 1910. You had 6 million women and 2 million additional men newly enfranchised, many voting for the very first time.
Huge change.
Huge. And the Liberal Party was completely fractured. You had these coupon candidates literally endorsed by a coupon, a signed letter from Lloyd George, and the Conservative leader Andrew Bonar Law running against independent Liberals.
It sounds like a recipe for voter confusion, doesn't it? Just chaos at the ballot box.
You'd think so, yet the coalition won an overwhelming 478 seats, a massive victory on paper.
And Lloyd George was incredibly popular then, seen as the man who led Britain to victory. He made these sweeping promises like a fit country for heroes to live in.
And make Germany pay the whole cost of the war. Big promises.
Very big. But despite that triumph, there was a huge catch, right?
Absolutely. Lloyd George's Liberals, the coupon Liberals, only won 123 seats. The Conservatives, they secured 335.
Enough to govern alone.
Exactly. So he was heavily dependent on Conservative support from day one. What did that dependence actually mean for his ability to lead?
Well, it meant that impressive victory was essentially a ticking clock. Lloyd George, the wartime miracle worker, now faced a barrage of post-war domestic and international problems.
Tough stuff.
And these problems demanded every ounce of his political brilliance. The fundamental insight here, I think, is that while he was a master of wartime unity, the divisions of peacetime, that was a far tougher beast to tame.
So what were those immediate challenges?
Domestically, the first hurdle was demobilization. There was initial chaos, actually, when they released essential workers first, which caused protests.
Right, I remember reading about that.
But the government quickly course-corrected. They shifted to a first-in, first-out policy and successfully demobbed over 4 million troops by autumn 1919. Many actually found jobs, thanks to a brief post-war boom.
Okay, so that crisis averted.
For a moment. Then came the economic whiplash. Rapid inflation as wartime controls were lifted. This led to, believe it or not, over 2,000 strikes in 1920 alone.
2,000? Yeah.
Working class disillusionment was high, fueled by their experiences in the trenches and also the influence of the Russian revolutions, pushing ideas like nationalization.
And you saw specific flashpoints, like on Clydeside.
Exactly. The Clydeside engineers' strike in Glasgow. Huge demonstrations, rioting, even a red flag being hoisted. The government felt it had to deploy troops and tanks. Lloyd George often tried to play for time, like he did with the Miners' Federation's demands for nationalization, offering the Sankey Commission to investigate.
Buying time. It sounds like a nation just perpetually on edge, and it only got worse, didn't it, with the economy?
Absolutely. The biggest headache hit in 1921. A sudden, severe economic slump began, throwing about 2 million people out of work by the end of the year.
2 million unemployed. That's staggering.
It was. And this wasn't just a post-war blip. It was really a continuation of Britain's longer-term economic decline, which had started back in the 1870s. Traditional exports, coal, ships, textiles, they just struggled because foreign buyers had found new sources during the war. Demand never really recovered.
And the social safety net couldn't cope.
Well, the 1911 National Insurance Act, which provided unemployment benefits, was extended, but the system was overwhelmed. Payments massively outweighed contributions. Now, this policy did ease the situation and maybe, just maybe, prevented a revolution. But it was a constant source of criticism from all sides.
How so?
Labor argued it only treated symptoms, didn't fix the underlying problems. Conservatives worried it was demoralizing workers, discouraging them from finding jobs.
And the coal industry seems central to so much of this unrest.
Really was. After this Sankey Commission failed to agree on nationalization, a huge blow to the miners, Lloyd George returned the mines to private control in April 1921. Mine owners immediately moved to cut wages because of the slump.
Which led to...
It culminated in Black Friday, April 15, 1921, a really infamous day. The miners' key allies in the Triple Alliance, the railwaymen and transport workers, shockingly abandoned their support for a general strike.
Left them high and dry.
Completely. The miners fought on alone for 3 tough months but lost everything. They were forced to accept severe wage cuts. Lloyd George technically solved the strike, yes, but the cost was immense in terms of working-class popularity. He never really recovered that support.
And then came the spending cuts.
Right. Facing falling government revenue because of the slump and the cost of benefits, the government wielded the Geddes Axe. Sir Eric Geddes chaired a committee recommending drastic cuts.
How drastic?
They slashed $64 million from budgets, the Army, the Navy, education, health, housing. Hugely unpopular, especially with labor and progressive liberals. It really made Lloyd George look like a prisoner of the conservatives to many people.
So, huge domestic problems. But he was also juggling international crises simultaneously.
Constantly. Foreign affairs took up a massive amount of his time and energy. He intervened in the Russian Civil War against the Bolsheviks. That was a failure. The Genoa Conference in 1922, which was meant to sort out Franco-German reparations and relations with Russia. A dismal failure, as Lowe puts it. France refused to compromise. The U.S. wouldn't even attend.
Not going well on any front, it seems.
And then perhaps the most famous or infamous moment was the Chanak incident in 1922. Turks were threatening to violate the Versailles settlement near Constantinople.
And Lloyd George reacted strongly.
Very strongly. He took a hard line, even warned of war with Britain and its empire. War was ultimately averted by the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. But here's the key mistake. He failed to consult the Commonwealth prime ministers before potentially committing their countries to war.
Ouch. How did that go down?
Outraged conservatives. It was seen as high-handed, disrespectful, and for many Tories, it really proved to be the final straw.
It's quite surprising, though, amidst all that chaos, all those fires he was fighting, that Lloyd George's coalition did actually manage some important reforms. It wasn't all crisis management.
Absolutely, and that often gets overshadowed. You had the Sex Disqualification Removal Act in 1919, which finally allowed women to stand for Parliament. Nancy Astor became the first woman to take her seat that year.
A landmark moment.
Yeah, definitely. They also passed the Addison Housing Act in 1919 for council houses, extended unemployment insurance, increased old age pensions, and the Rent Act in 1920 gave some protection to working-class tenants. It shows that even under immense pressure, significant legislative progress was possible.
But those achievements weren't enough to save the coalition in the end. Lloyd George's working-class support was clearly draining away. Labor won 13 by-elections between 1918 and 1922, which is a bad sign.
A very bad sign for him.
And then came the famous Carlton Club meeting in October 1922. The Conservatives finally pulled the plug, didn't they? Voted 185 to 85 to end their support. Lloyd George resigned immediately. So what was the core reason they finally abandoned their wartime leader after all that time?
It truly was a culmination of factors. But Stanley Baldwin's speech at that Carlton Club meeting was pivotal. Essentially, the Conservatives felt Lloyd George had outlived his usefulness. They deeply resented his handling of Ireland, first the brutal black and tans, then partitioning the country, which upset traditional Unionists in their ranks.
Ireland was a constant thorn.
A huge one. Then the Chanak incident highlighted what they saw as his impulsive, almost presidential style of foreign policy, and his blatant sale of knighthoods and other honors. Well, that was a constant embarrassment, feeding perceptions of corruption.
The sale of honors. That comes up a lot in accounts of his fall.
It does. And it fed into a broader sense of distrust. But the most critical reason, the one Baldwin hammered home, was the fear that Lloyd George, this incredibly dynamic force, was also, in Baldwin's words, a very terrible thing.
Strong language.
Very. The fear was he risked splitting the Conservative Party permanently, just as he had already done to the Liberals. Baldwin's argument resonated. Better to end the coalition now and save the unity of the Conservative Party.
And Lloyd George.
He resigned. Despite being only 59, he never again held important political office. His legacy is, well, hotly debated. A.J.P. Taylor called him the most inspired and creative British statesman of the 20th century. But Kenneth Morgan, perhaps, offers a more balanced view, a rogue elephant, a thoroughly modern politician who pioneered the interventionist state and welfare reforms, yet one who aroused distrust and hostility to an astonishing degree and just lacked the consistent support and party base needed for sustained power in peacetime.
So after Lloyd George's dramatic exit, the Conservatives, now under Andrew Bonar law, went to the country in November 1922 and won a decisive victory, 345 seats.
A solid majority.
And this election was a disaster for the Liberals, still fighting as two separate factions. Combined, they fell well behind Labour, who won 142 seats. It was crystal clear now. Labour had emerged as the main opposition party.
A major shift in the political landscape.
But this period of conservative stability didn't last long at all, did it?
Not at all. Bonar Law, sadly, resigned due to ill-health throat cancer in May 1923, and Stanley Baldwin took over as prime minister.
And almost immediately, Baldwin made a huge, some said idiotic political gamble.
He really did. Just months into his term, despite holding that comfortable majority, he called another general election in December 1923.
Why on earth would he do that?
To address the old controversial issue of tariff reform protectionism. Baldwin genuinely seemed to believe that imposing tariffs on foreign goods would make them more expensive, boost British industry, and solve the persistent unemployment problem.
A risky move, reviving that old debate. And how did that gamble play out?
It backfired spectacularly. The two liberal factions actually reunited under Asquith, specifically to campaign against tariffs, arguing for free trade to keep down the cost of living. The election results: a clear defeat for protectionism. The Conservatives lost their overall majority.
And Labour.
Labour gained seats again, further confirming their position as the clear alternative party to the Conservatives. The gamble weakened the Tories and strengthened Labour.
So after that 1923 election, no single party had an outright majority. This leads us to January 1924, a truly pivotal moment in British history. The Conservatives had lost their majority, couldn't really govern effectively. What happened next was this fascinating political dance.
Indeed it was. Baldwin, the Conservative leader, surprisingly, was actually quite happy, according to Lowe, for Labour to try and form a government. His thinking was they'd be constrained by their minority status, and the Tories and Liberals could just vote them out if they did anything too radical or unacceptable.
A calculated risk on his part. And the Liberals, what did Asquith do?
Asquith, leading the reunited but still weak Liberals, made a crucial decision. He decided to promise Labour his party's support in the House of Commons. His calculation: keep the Tories out, yes, but also, quite strategically, he knew this would outrage right-wing Liberals figures like Winston Churchill, likely pushing them towards the Conservatives, thus further weakening his own Liberal Party long-term.
Wow, that's quite the complex political maneuvering.
It really was. And so the outcome was historic. James Ramsay MacDonald, a remarkable figure, born illegitimately to poor parents, self-educated, became Britain's first ever Labour Prime Minister.
An extraordinary personal journey to number 10. And I imagine many people at the time were absolutely terrified, weren't they? Socialists in power, revolution around the corner.
Oh, absolutely. There were widespread fears of profound social revolution. People worried their savings would be confiscated. But honestly, nothing spectacular happened. MacDonald's cabinet was largely moderate, including several former Liberals. His chancellor, Philip Snowden, actually aimed to reduce taxes, not introduce the wealth tax many socialists were hoping for.
So in many ways, this first Labour government was quite a disappointment to its more ardent socialist supporters.
A great disappointment, as Lowe notes. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, both Labour governments of this interwar period were minority governments. They were utterly dependent on Liberal votes in the Commons.
Bush forced them to be moderate.
Exactly. They had to pursue moderate policies. Radical ideas like widespread nationalization or significant disarmament were simply off the table, politically unfeasible.
So they were restrained by circumstance. What other factors limited their impact during that short time in office?
Well, Labour also struggled, frankly, to project itself as a genuinely national party. It was still seen by many as intrinsically tied to industrial workers and trade unions, which led to distrust among people of property, the middle classes.
And the union ties themselves caused problems.
They did. The unions provided most of Labour's funds, but they also expected a degree of control, leading to friction. They gave surprisingly little support to the 1924 government and often criticized its necessary half measures. It was quite embarrassing for MacDonald when dockers and London transport workers went on strike, forcing him to proclaim a state of emergency.
Not a good look for a Labour PM.
Not at all. Plus, they faced the persistent problem of 1 million unemployed people, with no real answer beyond nationalization, which, as we said, was politically impossible for them at the time. And internally, MacDonald alienated the party's left wing. He calmly accepted the limitations of being a minority government and even condemned strikes, leading some on the left to question if he was really no socialist.
Despite all those constraints, all those difficulties, Labor did manage some notable achievements during its brief 9 months in power, particularly in social policy and foreign affairs.
They absolutely did. John Wheatley's Housing Act, for example, was significant. It provided £9 million a year in grants for building council houses, much-needed affordable housing. They increased old age pensions and unemployment benefits, and they brought back measures like free places in grammar schools and state scholarships for university, which had been cut by the Geddes Acts.
And on the international stage, MacDonald was foreign secretary as well as PM, wasn't he?
Yes, he took on both roles, and he was impressive. He was largely responsible, according to Lowe, for the Dawes Plan in 1924. This really helped improve Franco-German relations by setting more reasonable annual reparations payments for Germany and, crucially, securing a large foreign loan for Germany to help them pay.
A major diplomatic success.
Huge. It eased international tensions significantly. He also gave full diplomatic recognition to Soviet Russia, signed a trade treaty, and made a serious effort to strengthen the League of Nations, introducing the Geneva Protocol for compulsory arbitration of disputes.
So with these clear successes, especially in foreign policy, why did this government fall so suddenly, so quickly in October 1924, after only 9 months?
It really came down to two key incidents that spooked the public and Parliament, playing on fears about labor and communism. First, there was the Campbell Case.
What was that about?
The acting editor of a communist newspaper, the Workers' Weekly, J.R. Campbell, was charged with incitement to mutiny for an article urging soldiers not to shoot striking workers. But then, the Labor Attorney General, Sir Patrick Hastings, controversially withdrew the prosecution.
Why withdraw it?
Political pressure from within the Labor Party, it seems. But the Conservatives and Liberals immediately pounced, accusing the government of being sympathetic to communists and bowing to extremist pressure. This led directly to a successful vote of no confidence in the government. MacDonald resigned.
And that triggered another election.
Yes. And then, just 4 days before polling day in that October 1924 election, the Daily Mail newspaper published the infamous Zinoviev Letter.
Ah, the Zinoviev Letter. That sounds like something straight out of a spy novel. What was it supposed to be?
It was. The letter, supposedly from Grigory Zinoviev, a leading figure in the Russian Communist International, appeared to instruct British communists on how to infiltrate the Labor Party and organize a revolution.
Was it genuine?
Almost certainly not. It's widely believed to have been a forgery, likely concocted by anti-Bolshevik white Russian émigrés, possibly with some help from rogue elements in British intelligence. But its authenticity didn't really matter at the time. It caused an absolute sensation.
Fanning the flames of the Red Scare.
Exactly. It deeply fueled existing fears about Labor's supposed communist sympathies, especially coming so soon after the Campbell Case and the government's recognition of Soviet Russia. In the election that followed, the Conservatives, led by Baldwin, won a landslide victory with 419 seats.
And Labor. And the Liberals.
Labor actually lost 40 seats, dropping to 151, but importantly, their total vote actually increased by over a million compared to 1923. They solidified their base. The real victims were the Liberals. They were absolutely crushed, winning only 40 seats, a devastating defeat.
So did the Zinoviev Letter actually cost Labor the election?
Historians generally agree the Conservatives probably would have won anyway, given the circumstances. But the letter undoubtedly amplified anti-Labor sentiment and likely contributed to the scale of the Conservative victory and, perhaps more significantly, the collapse of the Liberal vote.
So what's the lasting significance of that short-lived first Labor government?
It's immense, despite its brevity. Crucially, it proved that a Labor government could function within the existing system without causing social upheaval or revolution. They gained valuable experience and a degree of respect, both at home and abroad. But, perhaps just as importantly, it also marked the definitive point of no return for the Liberal Party. They were now clearly the third party.
The fall of the Liberal Party truly is one of the most dramatic political developments in modern British history, isn't it? You think about it. A landslide victory in 1906, dominating politics. And less than 20 years later, they're relegated to a poor third place, a position they've essentially never recovered from. So what does this extraordinary decline tell us about historical change? How did it happen?
It's a huge question, and one historians have fiercely debated for decades. Was the Liberal decline somehow inevitable, perhaps due to the natural rise of labor representing the working class? Or could different decisions, different leadership have saved them? Did the rot set in before World War I, or was the war itself the decisive blow?
What are the arguments for pre-war decline?
Well, some historians point to internal splits even before 1914. They'd split over Irish Home Rule back in 1886, remember? And there was a growing tension between the new liberalism advocating state action and social reform and the old Gladstonian laissez-faire tradition of minimal government.
And Dangerfield's famous book.
Right, George Dangerfield's The Strange Death of Liberal England. He argued quite dramatically that pre-war crises clashes with the House of Lords, the potential for civil war in Ireland over Home Rule, the suffragette campaign, massive industrial unrest, stretched the Liberal government beyond the limits of their capabilities. He paints a picture of a party already floundering before the war hit.
What about longer-term social trends?
Historians like Henry Pelling and Ross McKibben emphasize those. They argue that the growth of large industrial cities, greater concentration of industry, and the rising cost of living naturally pushed working-class voters towards the newly formed Labour Party. Especially crucial was the massive growth in trade union membership. It nearly doubled between 1909 and 1913 to over 4 million.
And the unions were backing labor.
Increasingly so, yes, especially after the political levy became legal again in 1913, allowing unions to fund political candidates. Then the 1918 Representation of the People Act tripled the electorate, creating an industrial working-class majority for the first time. Pelling and McKibben argued this was a crucial factor, and the Liberals simply failed to attract this new mass electorate.
But not everyone agrees they were doomed before 1914, right? Some historians push back against that idea, inevitable decline.
Precisely. Paul Adelman, for instance, believes Dangerfield's argument is hopelessly exaggerated, and Peter Clark, in his influential study Lancashire and the New Liberalism, argued the Liberal Party actually had plenty of life left in 1914. He suggested they were adapting to social changes, promoting new liberalism, and successfully attracting working-class support in many areas.
So they were still viable.
Clark's evidence, looking at by-elections, suggested Labour was actually losing ground to the Liberals after 1910, and Liberal losses were often to the Conservatives, not Labour. So if they weren't already in terminal decline before 1914, then the question becomes, why did they plummet to third place just 8 years later by 1922?
And this is where many historians point directly to the First World War as the key factor, the real killer blow.
Exactly. Trevor Wilson famously compared the war to a rampant omnibus, which first knocked down and then ran over the unfortunate Liberal Party.
A vivid image. How did the war act like this omnibus?
Well, first, Wilson argues the Liberals' hesitant, often inappropriate attempts to run the war based on their traditional laissez-faire principles simply ruined their prestige. They weren't suited ideologically or practically to managing a total war economy.
And the internal split.
That was perhaps the most devastating impact. Lloyd George's maneuvering to replace Asquith as Prime Minister in December 1916, forming a coalition government with Conservatives and some Labour figures, fatally divided the Liberal Party. Asquith's supporters, the independent Liberals, never forgave what they saw as a betrayal. This left the party hopelessly fractured and fighting itself in those crucial post-war elections of 1918 and 1922.
So the war split the Liberals.
While simultaneously strengthening Labour. It's quite ironic. While the Liberals tore themselves apart, Labour benefited. Their wartime leader, Arthur Henderson, gained valuable cabinet experience. He used the war years to focus on internal party organization, providing Labour with a new constitution, a clearer socialist manifesto, and proper constituency organizations across the country.
Making them more professional.
Much more. Labour also adopted a new foreign policy favoring pacifism and open diplomacy, which directly attracted many disillusioned left-wing liberals. And as we mentioned, trade union membership surged during the war, from about 4.1 million in 1914 to nearly 8 million by 1919, with most of the big unions now formally affiliated with the Labour Party, providing funds and voters.
So Labour emerged from the war united and better prepared, while the Liberals were divided and discredited.
That's a fair summary. Labour was simply in a much stronger position than the fragmented Liberals to compete in the new post-war political landscape shaped by that mass electorate.
Okay, so the war was devastating, but were there other factors after 1918 that sealed the Liberal fate? Leadership issues, policy mistakes?
Absolutely. Post-1918 Liberal leadership was definitely a liability. Even when they reunited briefly for the 1923 election, Asquith was over 70 by then, seen as rather old and out of touch with the concerns of the new electorate. Lloyd George, while dynamic, had lost a lot of his pre-war popularity with working-class voters due to his close cooperation with the conservatives during the coalition and his government's handling of things like the coal strikes and the Get Us Acts.
And their policies felt outdated.
To some extent, yes. Many of their traditional flagship issues like Irish Home Rule or Welsh disestablishment were either settled or no longer major concerns after 1921. They struggled to compete with Labour's focus on new social policies and the appeal of Ramsay MacDonald's leadership.
And then came that crucial decision after the 1923 election.
Right. The historian Chris Cook argues that Asquith and the Liberals made the ultimate fatal mistake by allowing MacDonald and the Labour Party to form that minority government without any understandings or conditions.
That seems like a massive strategic miscalculation in hindsight. Why would they just hand power over like that?
It was a huge gamble, driven by a desire to keep the Conservatives out, perhaps hoping Labour would fail and voters would return to the Liberals. But they underestimated their opponents. MacDonald's strategy, quite ruthlessly, was to use the opportunity to destroy the Liberals as the rival party of the left. He knew Britain's first-past-the-post electoral system heavily penalizes smaller third parties.
And Baldwin's strategy played into this too.
Perfectly. Baldwin, the conservative leader, shrewdly encouraged the Liberals to prop up Labour. He calculated correctly that this would outrage right-wing or middle-class Liberals, causing them to abandon the party and switch to voting Conservative as the only reliable way to keep Labour out in the future.
A pincer movement, almost.
Exactly. Both strategies worked perfectly for Labour and the Conservatives, and disastrously for the Liberals. MacDonald ruthlessly rejected all suggestions of an alliance with the Liberals during his time in office. And in the October 1924 election that followed the Zinoviev Letter scare, the Liberals were, as Lowe puts it, simply crushed.
The numbers really tell the story, don't they?
They do. They won only 40 seats, and their total vote fell by a staggering 1.4 million compared to the previous year. It was effectively the end of the road for them as a potential party of government. Labour had now shown it could govern without causing revolution, convincing many anti-conservatives that Labour was now the only viable alternative.
And they lost financial support too.
Crucially, yes. The Liberals lost vital financial backing from their traditional middle-class and business supporters, who increasingly saw the Conservatives as the safer bet against socialism. The first-past-the-post electoral system just compounded their misery. In that 1924 election, the Liberals got nearly 18% of the vote, but that translated into only 40 seats, just 6.5% of the seats in Parliament.
Whereas under proportional representation,
they might have won closer to 100 seats, keeping them much more relevant. This created that persistent wasted vote feeling that further discouraged potential Liberal voters in subsequent elections. Even in 1929, when a reunited Liberal Party under Lloyd George fought with an attractive modern program, they still only scraped together 59 seats, confirming that wasted vote belief.
So, in essence, after World War I, with the Conservatives solidifying as the party of property owners and labor, forging its alliance with the trade unions and the organized working class, there just wasn't a large enough distinct interest group left to sustain the Liberal Party in the long run.
That's a strong argument many historians make. The political ground had shifted beneath their feet. However, it's always worth asking, as Lowe hints, if they had found the right policies and the right leader to truly capture a significant chunk of those newly enfranchised working-class votes, perhaps their decline might not have been quite so steep or quite so inevitable. It remains one of the great what-ifs of British political history.
This deep dive into post-WWI British politics really underscores how quickly the ground beneath our political feet can shift, doesn't it? From the precarious rise and dramatic fall of the Lloyd George coalition, to the brief yet incredibly significant experiment of the first Labour government, and then the dramatic, almost irreversible decline of the once dominant Liberal Party. It truly was a period of profound confusion and shifting power dynamics, just as we set out to explore.
It absolutely highlights that political normalcy is rarely stable, and that profound confusion, times of great upheaval, can actually be fertile ground for entirely new political identities and new power structures to emerge. The lessons from Britain's turbulent 1918-1924 period really underscore the complex interplay of economic forces, deep social change, critical leadership decisions or mistakes, and even the mechanics of electoral systems in shaping a nation's political destiny.
It really makes you wonder, Looking at our own contemporary challenges across the globe, what historical echoes are we hearing today? What new political landscapes might be forming right now, perhaps subtly, that we're only just beginning to perceive? What stands out to you thinking about how countries navigate these profound periods of disruption and change?
It's a powerful reminder, I think, that even in times that feel relatively stable, the ground beneath our political feet is always shifting, often in ways we don't fully grasp until much later. History rarely repeats itself exactly, but understanding these past transformations certainly gives us valuable perspective on the present.